We are going to get going.
I might have to jump networks here real quick because the network I'm on seems a little glitchy. So I'm going to get this other one set up. In the meantime, notes are out in chat. For those of you not on YouTube, congratulations. And if you're not on YouTube, you can go to PATRIOT'S and look for this shows tab under the shows column, go up to menu and find shows. And then you'll see this shows tab here. And if you want the notes, you can go to the section that says read, watch, think for yourself, and you will get to the archive notes. We are on episode 82, and the archive notes are in groups of 10. So episode 82 will be the first hyperlink you see here, Big Tech episodes 81 through 90. We are going to watch a video that the anonymous YouTube video channel put out. Not specifically that it's anonymous that put it out, but simply because when Russian Bot sent this over to me, the first half of this video is really very good as it relates to the concept or the idea of genetic manipulation being used to connect the brain to the internet. And then we're going to get back into Defense Intelligence Agency's report on Soviet and Czechoslovakian parapsychology, which I think at this point we're at psychokinesis or telekinesis, and then beneath this section is remote viewing. And all of this has to do with bioenergy, being able to measure, quantify, track, understand, transmit, and receive biological energy. If you want to browse this kind of stuff on your own time, go to humaninternet.org. And there's many categories here. And as time permits, I will update these, but there's quite a bit of information. If you haven't spent any time on this site, I encourage you to do so. It provides an overview of what is going to be possible or what is possible as it relates to putting your brain and your body on the internet at varying degrees, complete and total fusion with the internet, or just maybe reading your vital signs and being able to understand a little bit about how you're feeling and what your health is, the way they sell it with the Apple Watch and the headphones and the Fitbits and all of that. But there's so much more those things can do. So I encourage you to go here and look. If you don't really want to read, you can go to the media section, and I'm building the media section out as time goes on. I'm posting the PSB broadcasts. I download them and render them to clean them up, so to speak, and load them on my own YouTube channel. And then I occasionally update this site with all of the previous videos. I started doing this, 2 months ago, and they're all here. I encourage you to watch the Huawei 5G human bond communication, and also the 5G epigenetic protein phenotype manipulation, where they can go in and manipulate protein expression and phenotypic expression in your cells using 5G, or I should say electromagnetic radiation. Don't want to necessarily quantify it as just 5G because it can be done through a variety of methods, including using sound. And then here's COVID-19 DNA resonance, skin as an antenna. And this other one here, BrainQ Technologies. This is a startup company funded by Google, and it's an Israeli company, and they can steer brain cells and regrow and enhance nerves, so they can take Alzheimer's and paralysis patients and rehabilitate them by putting them into magnetic fields and modulating the magnetic fields in very specific ways. And they focus mostly on cloud-based computation and cloud-based AI to be able to deliver these types of therapies. And then there's also using electroceuticals or electromedicine to be able to decode and understand the nervous system. And so these are all here on humaninternet.org. They're also on my YouTube channel, which is here, Big Tech playlist on YouTube. And then PatriotSoapbox.com, Big Tech show banner is also here under the media tab on humaninternet.org. There's also extensive videos on 5G, and it gives you examples of what radar technologies can do in a car. These are still, or in addition to being in a vehicle, these are also going to be useful with the 5G antenna platforms. We will get to 5G antennas and directed energy systems as time goes on. Nonetheless, these are here should you choose to explore them. And if you really want to get into the specifics of wireless energy, there's sections on Wi-Fi and wideband. And we've gone over this. Wi-Fi can extract your speech. They can extract your keystrokes. They can extract your handwriting. Ultra wideband tracks you down to basically a millimeter resolution. All new phones are coming out with wideband, and there's so much more that wideband can do outside of just tracking you. It can do a great many things. In addition to that, there's also a section on beamforming. And again, we'll get into this in a lot of detail as time goes on, but beamforming has everything to do with this ability of the ability to steer and shape radiation fields and direct them and point them in certain directions, concentrate the energy. You can merge many fields at the same time to create unique pockets of energy at a device or at a person. And as time permits, we will go through these things. But should you want to look at these on your own, they're all here on this site. And none of this is reading. It's literally just watching TV. There's also plenty to read. I mean, there's an entire section on Google radar patents, for example, the Google Soli. And this stuff they understand you better than you know yourself. They can image your body, skin, bone, cartilage, muscle, smooth muscle versus non-smooth muscle. There's another term for it. It's escaping me at the time. They can understand your skin temperature, your heart rate, how much perspiration you have on your skin. This technology can scale through basically all frequency ranges that are currently available. And I mean, there's just patents after patents after patents after patents that discuss what this technology, this radar technology can do. So I encourage you to come to the site and look at it and learn a little bit about what is in your household, what is at your workplace, and more importantly, what's around your children, because these devices like an iPad are standard issue for students now. And they are delivering wideband technology and radar technology along with facial recognition and AMO LED style screens that have nano etched glass that allow for nano-sized pixels to be modulated in very specific ways that your children are going to be looking at for hours and hours and hours and hours a day. And all of these things interface with the brain and the nervous system. And we will go over nervous system manipulation with monitors at a later time. But nonetheless, it's deeply concerning to me, which is why I spend the time doing what I'm doing, so that I can share with you just exactly what it is that big tech and big telecom are deploying around us and selling to us through mechanisms of convenience. So with that said, we are going to look a little bit at genetic manipulation first. For those of you that have been around, this may be a refresher. For those of you that have not been around, please pay attention, because this will be an intro to some very detailed information that we'll get into likely in a few months. So here we go.
That we are seeing in the general public these days about the willingness to throw away their rights.
Whether it be the right to bear arms, the right of free speech,
the right to assembly, or the freedom to due process. It makes one wonder what the hell is going on.
How did people get like this?
How are people seemingly arguing against their self-interest and feeling no compunction about it?
I'm going to take you on a tour of what is really happening behind the curtains in the world, all of which are being portrayed as necessary actions for the greater good of humanity.
Okay, so this is really the first video that I've seen that provides a clearly defined set of issues, so to speak, and they're specific. But it's put together with some good graphics, and the narrator speaks very well. And this is why I'm sharing it with you, because it's the visualizations are, in my view, important for you to see, specifically when we get back into this kind of tech.
In 2013, former President Barack Obama was announcing his administration's brain research through advancing innovative neurotechnologies. The study, describing a way to manipulate a lab animal's brain circuitry accurately enough to turn behaviors both on and off. The point of the remote control mouse is not to create an army of robo-rodents, but to perfect a technique that will control the behavior by activating and deactivating neurons.
Okay, so Obama Brain Initiative 2013 was just a public rollout of what's been an ongoing project for a very, very, very long time, designing automation technologies for the human so that human and computer can merge together. And obviously you can infer what the military applications of this are. It's probably the easiest way to kind of visualize what that would look like, where you have a pilot that has a helmet on and they've got some sensor arrays in the helmet that allow a direct brain communication to the airplane and or to drones that are flying with the pilot, or a boat or a tank. Very easy to kind of visualize that. We've kind of seen those types of things perhaps in movies. The civilian or social applications are much, much different. The civilian or social applications would be much more subtle, much more gentle. And it starts, in my view, at school age with things like mobile devices in young humans' hands, and ultimately delivery through food, water, air, and or vaccination, to provide the genetic information to modify the neurons. And what you're looking at on the screen is a brain on the left, and on the right you have multipolar, bipolar, and looks like something else that's cut off on the bottom. But these are different types of neurons that he's basically laying out as what are ultimately going to be modified. So here we go.
The technique used to control neurons is called DREADS, designer receptors exclusively activated by designer drugs. Because the receptor does not respond to other molecules, including natural ones in the brain, the only way to activate the neurons is via the human-made ones. DREADS allows scientists to manipulate neurons without implanting anything in the brain.
DREADS. So DREADS is a program or a classification of genetic manipulation of brain cells or nervous system cells that allow chemicals, designer chemicals, pharmaceuticals, to interact with neurology to turn on or turn off brain cells. And it can be done with a much smaller dose than a typical, what we would consider a typical dose. So this idea is that you insert genetic information, it modifies the brain cell or the nervous system cell, basically a neuron. And when the neuron is modified, it responds, it will fire or it will turn off. It will respond with a very, very, very subtle or minor amount of a particular type of chemical. So there's a lot of complexity there. You have to understand what chemical is going to be used and then find the right genetic information to insert into the body so that when the neurons take in that genetic information, when they express the proteins in the neuron, they will be responsive to a very particular type of medication, a very particular type of chemical. That's what the DREADS program is in a nutshell.
Look at this. Current optogenetic experiments rely on extracting opsins, light-sensitive proteins, from plants which can be introduced to mammals by methods including injection and infection via adenovirus.
So just spent a lot of time talking about chemical brain manipulation, basically, moving into optogenetics. This is the manipulation of the brain using light. And he's talking about being able to insert genetic information through an injection or through a virus. And he'll get into it can either be administered through a needle or basically open air contamination, a virus. And in this case, he's listed an adenovirus. There's also a lentivirus and all kinds of other viruses. I mean, if any of you have been to a doctor with your children and they have pamphlets on the different viruses that you need to protect your child from to thus sell you on the idea of vaccination. Viruses are pieces of software that, when inserted into the body, manipulate genetic information.
What they do is they genetically engineer a receptor that can get into a person through a viral vector, and what that means is through an injection of the vaccine or through the contraction of an adenovirus which has been modified. You might think, oh well, I just won't get injected, and I won't go anywhere where I can get this adenovirus. Adenovirus, there's 52 of them. And they range from the common cold, fever, sore throat, pink eye. They're prevalent. So that's creepy, because if you look at what it says, DREADS allows scientists to manipulate neurons without implanting anything in the brain. It indeed makes one wonder, given what we see today in the general public. You do need to take the designer drug, though, to make this effective.
Okay, so he's jumping back and forth between optogenetics and DREADS, which is chemogenetics, chemo being chemical. I just want to make that distinction because there are a few editorial components in this video that I think need to be clarified. And that's just it, right? He's going to be going back and forth between optogenetics and chemogenetics. There are many, many other types of genetic manipulation: sonogenetics, mechanogenetics, electrogenetics, and many others. There are combinatorial manipulations as well. Magnetogenetics just came to mind. So this is just an appetizer, a sampling of the types of genetic research that's being done as it relates to modifying the nervous system and the brain to ultimately be able to interface with it easier, more efficiently, more effectively, with less energy.
Once delivered into an organism, opsins can be expressed in eye, brain, or skin cells, allowing their light sensitivity to be remotely activated or silenced with timed pulses of light in different color wavelengths across the light spectrum that can target multiple bodily systems and cause a variety of biological effects.
So he moved back to optogenetics. And he indicated that the wavelength of light, meaning the color of light that we would perceive, matters. And they can specifically target or they can specifically design what wavelength will cause an interaction for optogenetics. How many colors do you see on your phone? How many different wavelengths is that? How many colors do you not see on your phone? How many wavelengths do you not see on your phone? Meaning, does it emit infrared? Does it emit ultraviolet? And I can tell you with certainty your phone emits infrared because that's what facial recognition uses when you log into your phone. And infrared passes up to 10 centimeters into and through the body, into and through bone. And off we go.
If targeted precisely enough with the appropriate light, it's thought that optogenetics could be used by manipulating neural circuits involved with pain, fear, reward, wakefulness, and social behaviors.
There's this enormous mystery waiting to be unlocked. And the Brain Initiative will change that by giving scientists the tools they need to get a dynamic picture of the brain in action and better understand how we think and how we learn and how we remember. And that's part of what this Brain Initiative is about.
If scientists can turn on or off specific targeted groups of neurons at will, they place themselves in between the natural human experience and basically their keyboard. They place themselves between you and your natural human reactions to things. So, optogenetics looks like the way to go. But how do you get people to put wires in their heads? Well, you can't.
So are you seeing what's being portrayed here? This idea of interfering with normal biological processes that have everything to do with how your brain and your body and your consciousness works. So what we're looking at here is a visual and audio description of an interplay or an interference, an interjection or manipulation of free will using energy, whatever that means to you. To me, it's light, sound, electromagnetics, and in this case, chemicals. And that pretty much encapsulates just about everything we interact with and come in contact with. Free will. How important is free will to you?
But it turns out now you don't have to. Here we have the new development in optogenetics. Luminopsins, luminescent opsins, or LMOs, were developed to achieve combined chemo and optogenetic manipulation. Luminopsins allow manipulation of neuronal activity over a range of spatial and temporal scale in the same experimental animal. What they are saying here is not only can they turn on specific reactions, but they can also turn off those same reactions. A problem they were having with the other methods is they could only do one. They could either stimulate the receptor or suppress the receptor. With the combined chemo optogenetic manipulation, they can do both. They're using luminopsins, so they don't need the wiring anymore. Basically, science can use these luminopsins to interfere with a person's free will. The other function of optogenetics is just a simple observation. They might want to know how you feel about seeing a particular image, how that image changes the next thing you do. Basically, the scientists can understand what exactly is going on in our bodies and our minds, but to do that, it can't be invasive.
So this is just, that's one combination, light and chemicals. It's just one. From what we've covered previously on this show, they can introduce more than one type of light receptor protein or luminescent protein, opsin. Channel rhodopsin is what comes to mind, what we discussed. They can introduce one that responds to red light, one responds to green light, or one that responds to yellow light, for example, and use those wavelengths to do exactly as this gentleman stated, to turn off or turn on receptors, turn off or turn on neurons. It can all be done with light. It can be done with combinations of things. In this case, he's showcasing a paper that he found that indicates that they're using chemicals and light simultaneously to be able to regulate the on-off switches of the neurons in your brain and your nervous system.
Well, what have you noticed proliferating on the market for the last 8 years? Microsoft Band. It'll record all the stuff going on in your body. Same with Google Fit or Apple Watch. This Muse head-brain sensing headband is even scarier. There's also 23andMe, which collects your genetic data. Imagine if they had a combination of all these things. All of this is attached to your smartphone. So it's not so much the device, it's the smartphone monitoring that's the dangerous part. Because who's getting that data? And what are they doing with it? Look at what it says here. This is from 2016. Towards a psychophysics of interoceptive processes, the measurement of heartbeat detection. Over the past 50 years, research on interoception has grown exponentially from 17 citations of interocept in 1965 to 8,440 in 2015. Web of Science. The early Russian work was summarized in Razran's landmark article on the subject and demonstrated, inter alia, that interception participated fully in the intersensory processes of Pavlovian conditioning. They want to know all of our interoceptive data because it plays directly into Pavlovian conditioning. You can change anybody's behavior if you know how to manipulate those feelings inside them when they are experiencing something. You do that over and over and over, and you actually change their whole physiological responses to it.
So we have gone over the watches, the headphones, some of the cell phone methods, mechanisms by which they are able to extract your physiological information. Heartbeat, respiration, changes in your emotional state based on electromagnetic wave measurements, Wi-Fi, ultra-wideband, changes in blood flow in your face using a camera, changes in your pulse rate using the camera, understanding temperature, orientation, hand movements. We haven't even mentioned at this point voice recognition, stressors in the voice or otherwise. Different behaviors as it relates to how you interact online, how hard you type on a screen, what you look at, pattern recognition. All of these things accumulate, coalesce, and collate together to form psychological profiles. So we have this idea of creating a closed loop system whereby you, the human, are fed stimuli, and we can all generally agree at this point that stimuli, common understanding of stimuli is what we see coming through a YouTube video, mainstream news, radio advertising, commercials on TV, movies, whatever, right? That's pretty generic, pretty milquetoast, warm stimuli. But there's many other ways to stimulate that are invisible. That's what we discuss here. This idea of using chemicals or light to stimulate the brain and the body those are just two mechanisms. Electromagnetic fields is another mechanism. Magnetic fields being their own, electric fields being their own, and electromagnetic fields being their own. You have sound, binaural beats, you can look that up. And you have flicker rate with light. You also have vibration, which you could equate to sound, but it's not exclusive to sound because electromagnetic waves generate vibration in the body. Thermoacoustics. You also have photoacoustics, where light can generate vibration in the body. And you also have this idea of resonance, whereby electric, magnetic, electromagnetic fields or sound waves can resonate cells, proteins, DNA, or ions, which is how the brain and the nervous system work with ions. They can resonate those things, direct and steer them in very particular and specific ways. So we all understand what's coming through the screen and the speakers, and we understand that as stimuli, right? Whatever interests you is what you watch, whatever you spend your time on. That's interesting to you. It's stimulating, stimuli. But the palette, the tool set, the tool kit as it relates to being able to stimulate a human or an animal or plant, a biologic, that toolkit is far more extensive than a picture coupled with sound that creates a movie or a program. It's much more sophisticated than that. And so what they're getting at here is they need to be able to measure the response when they're providing you stimuli, whatever that stimuli is. And that is what the watch, the earphones, and the cell phone and the electromagnetic fields do. They measure your biologic response to whatever stimuli is in your environment, whether it be people, place, or thing, or something coming from an electronic device or an electromagnetic field or an electric field, anything that can be used as a stimulant. The idea is to have a mobile device be able to read your response to any stimulant. And that is what the wearable technology and the wireless technology can do today.
Have you ever wondered if we are going towards that future? A world that is entirely sending feedback regularly to some processor somewhere? Is there a prison around us of electronic biofeedback and manipulation? Let's say there will be a flu virus, all the common adenoviruses, and they had this modified dread receptor in there. We would never know, and it would be in there, in our body, just waiting to be activated by the designer drug or by light activation. Maybe it sounds paranoid, or maybe not. You've been served with the opportunity to decide what to believe.
The secrecy that surrounds this issue is...
Okay, so the second half of this video is kind of getting into alternative energy, and this video really steers into another direction. But the concluding remarks that we just listened to are absolutely spot on. When you think about a biological weapon being released on the world, and the fact that it's been spliced and welded together, and it's got 5 different strains of God knows what, and multiple locations with chunks of HIV genetic code in it. And now we've got admissions from various sources that indicate that COVID-19, for example, is man-made. The implications are really profound, and to me, very concerning as it relates to what modern warfare looks like. And long-term, what does that do to the species? When you look at what modern warfare looks like, does it really mean death, carnage, blood, guns, bombs, tanks, airplanes? Or is it a very, very slow, deliberate progression to an intended goal, whereby the manipulation of economic and medical and social issues or behaviors or activities are used in combination in order to steer and direct the species down a specific path? What does warfare look like when you look at warfare as a generational activity? Not a quick, aggressive 1-year, 2-year, 3-year campaign, but something that may take 20 years. And as we move forward in time, year after year after year, the Overton window, the window with which society is comfortable functioning within, changes, and it moves on a scale in one direction or another. And when you look at the various countries throughout the world, most function with governments or leadership that transitions generationally. The United States is rare in that leadership changes every 4 or 8 years, outside of the stay-behind networks that are currently embedded that are causing problems, in my opinion, today. The stay-behind networks, the senior executive services, for example, being one group. What does warfare look like? Where is the species going? And with that, we'll continue on with our read, the Soviet and Czechoslovakian parapsychology. This video was posted yesterday now. It was September 24th on the anonymous official website. Everyone must know this before it's deleted. For those of you that want to search it, for those of you that want to pull it out of the notes, you've been directed earlier in the show to where to go get that. I'll post the notes one more time in chat. And for those of you that aren't in chat, go to patriotsoapbox.com and look for the Big Tech Show and look at the archives. We are on episode 82. It's listed underneath that episode. So, Soviet and Czechoslovakian parapsychology. We are now on part 3. Psychokinesis or telekinesis research. And I want to highlight for you the fact that this was posted in 1975. So we are, 45 years down the road? No. 85, 95, 45 years down the road. A lot's happened since 1975. This research was done in the 60s, and off we go. Hang on one sec. This, for some reason, this document does not function well in a web browser. So, psychokinesis research. Psychokinesis, or as it's sometimes called telekinesis, is the ability to influence animate or inanimate objects at a distance without physical contact by means of uncontrolled or controlled biological energy fields. Some, but not all, of the effects of psychokinesis include initiation or cessation of motion in inanimate objects, apparent neutralization of the effect of gravity on inanimate objects, meaning levitation, induction of changes in physiological processes of animate matter, the creation of measurable electric, electromagnetic, electrostatic, magnetic, or gravitational fields around target objects, and the imposition of images on shielded photographic emulsions. Current Soviet and Czechoslovakian parapsychological research emphasis is on identification and quantification of the generated bioenergetic force fields, identification of the physiological processes underlying their origin, and development of practical applications of psychokinetic energy. There are fundamental differences between the Soviet and Czech approaches to psychokinetic research. Since paranormal research was granted political respectability in the Soviet Union in the 1950s, Soviet scientists have concentrated their investigations on a relatively few highly gifted psychic individuals who have attempted to determine what, if any, physiological attributes underlie their capabilities and differ from those of non-psychic subjects. Parallel with these efforts to determine causes, the Soviets have concentrated considerable effort on determining the nature of the energy fields formed and attempts to determine whether all psychokinetically gifted subjects create the same or different energy fields. Czechoslovakian research is also cause and effect oriented, but appears to be governed far more by the belief that psychokinetic effects can be produced by a majority of people and that no inherent or highly developed psychic capability is prerequisite to the investigation and demonstration of psychokinetic effects. Soviet research has taken several different directions in efforts to develop materialistic explanations for observed psychokinetic effects. This research has involved in-depth studies of the characteristics of the electrical field between subject and object. So they're measuring the electric field, right? Characterization of the electrical fields immediately around the subject, study of bioelectrical fields by detection devices, study of subjects' brainwave patterns, and photography of the subject's bioenergy fields. This is back in the 60s, folks. To date, Soviet scientists were or are by no means in accord concerning the nature of the forces involved, but all are in agreement that a physical energy is at work. So what they're getting at here is that there's conflicting opinions amongst the Soviet scientists who are spending their time and energy researching these things as it relates to how to define what they're witnessing or what they're measuring, but they all agree that there is something that is occurring. Dr. Viktor Adamenko of the Moscow Institute of Radiophysics, Dr. Viktor Inishuin of the Kazakh University alma mater, and Dr. Gennady Sergeyev of the A.A. Udomsky Physiological Institute, Leningrad, are the leading Soviet theoreticians studying psychokinesis or telekinesis. Both Inishuin and Sergeyev have developed theories based on the existence of a new form of energy, a form of biological energy referred to as bioplasma. They consider psychokinetic effects as analogous to lightning accidentally charging a surface, and feel that movement in psychokinesis occurs as a result of the interaction of the object's electrostatic charge and electromagnetic field with the human operator's field. The biological energy involved under conscious direction by the subject, who can make a target object start or stop motion, change direction, or rotate. Sergeyev has developed instrumentation which measures changes in the bioplasmic field at distances of up to 3 meters. He has recorded fields of 10,000 volts per centimeter in the vicinity of a target object with no indication of an electric field in the space between the subject and the object. According to Sergeyev, bioplasmic energy is maximally concentrated in the head region. He attributes psychokinetic to a polarization of the bioplasma in a laser-like fashion and refers to this as a biolaser effect, which acts as a material force upon the object. Dr. Sergeyev has developed detectors that monitor the energy field during psychokinetic demonstrations. Although Western observers have been denied information on the construction of the detectors, the information reported to have been classified by the Soviet military, details may have been published by the Soviet Academy of Sciences. It is possible that the Sergeyev detectors are similar to those developed in or by an American, David Thompson. Thompson's devices, which have been used in human force field research at the University of Saskatchewan, Canada, consist of 2 capacitor plates, a preamplifier, a line recorder like that of an encephalograph. Other Soviet force field detector research has been done at the Laboratory for Biological Cybernetics in the University of Leningrad Physiology Department. There, according to Soviet reports, Dr. Pavel Gulyev developed extremely sensitive electrodes capable of detecting the electrical force fields of nerves at distances of up to 24 centimeters. That's 9.5 inches. So they're detecting energetic or energy fields from nerves, basically 10 inches away from sensors. Far more detailed information on Soviet biological energy detectors, for more information, the reader is referred to references 5, pages 393 through 396, and the references are at the bottom of this document. Dr. Adamenko has conducted experiments to ascertain the role of electrostatic charges on the surface of target objects as the cause of their movement. Adamenko has advanced the theory that man may be anisotropic. For example, man may be able to alter his external energy state in accordance with his internal energy state, and this ability in turn may depend on his physiological processes. According to Adamenko, humans, animals, and plants probably possess electric fields as a result of spontaneous tissue polarization. And such fields may interact with externally imposed or induced charges. He proposes that the observed properties of living tissues come closest to the properties of electrets. Electrets are defined as forcibly polarized bodies, having comparatively high conductivity and the ability to maintain an external electrical field after exposure to adverse factors of either the external or internal environment. So I'm going to pause here because some of that may not click, right? What they're saying here is that you have positive and negative charges. we understand that if you understand alternating electric fields, right? It goes from a positive state to a negative state, back and forth, up, down, positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative. That's alternating current. Direct current is where you have a flow in one direction only, right? It doesn't go back and forth, but there's still a positive and a negative. So what they're getting at here is that the body or biological organisms also exhibit those characteristics, positive and negative. And that what they're saying here is that this idea of being able to concentrate or focus or transmit energy, telekinesis, psychokinesis, influencing the environment around a human. What they're alluding to here, or trying to quantify what Adamenko is saying, is that the body is able to polarize tissue polarization. So there are tissues in the body that basically will generate a field potential where there will be more negative on one side and more positive on another side. And as a result of that, they actually create an electric field, an energy field that emits from the body. And that energy field or electric field then is able to interact with other fields in the environment, other biologicals or otherwise, animate objects, inanimate objects, alive objects, dead objects. This idea of telekinesis, being able to move things with your mind, is probably the cliche that most simply illustrates what it is we're looking at. And what we're reading here are different opinions of experts in the Soviet bloc as they're trying to understand and quantify and define what telekinesis is. So, Adamenko has shown that the material basis of contactless, no contact interaction between man and objects results from an electrostatic field whose magnitude depends on man's physiological state. Other Soviet researchers have observed that when subjects are exposed to various external stimuli, their physiological state varies in both the character and magnitude of the bioelectric effect. They have formed the hypothesis that the polarization of living tissues is the explanation for the contactless interactions between humans and objects. Adamenko has also advanced the concept that the thermodynamic sense, living tissue, may not be subject to the same physical laws that validate or that are valid for inorganic matter. He argues that living tissue may possess new properties in terms of thermodynamics when compared with inorganic matter. He believes that if living molecules differ quantitatively from inorganic molecules, then the distinction may exist between living and technical force fields. To demonstrate his point, Adamenko makes reference to healing by the laying on of hands, in Western terms, faith healing. The Soviets have measured electrical fields between healers and patients, yet knowing these field potentials, they have not been able to duplicate the beneficial effects obtained from humans by means of mechanically generated fields. So another example of this, folks, would be Chinese medicine. And you can look that up, where Chinese doctors using Chinese medicine charge their body, and then they treat a patient using their hands, just making contact with the person in specific areas of their body to interact with that person's chi or their acupuncture meridians, basically the electrical circuitry in their body. And so it's not, these ideas are not exclusive to the Soviet Union or to Western medicine as it relates to faith healing. I mean, Chinese medicine's been around for thousands and thousands of years. All that we're looking at here is this idea of science, or scientists trying to quantify it to an extent that they understand it well enough to be able to generate it on demand with mechanical devices, or to be able to control it in people well enough to ultimately utilize people as a tool or a resource for military, academia, or medicine. Alexander Dubrov, a biophysicist with the Institute of Earth Physics, USSR Academy of Sciences, has advanced the concept of biogravitation to explain psychokinesis or telekinesis. Biogravitation as a term was introduced by Soviet physicist V.A. Bunin in 1960 and was used to refer to the ability of living organisms to form and detect gravitational waves. Dubrov bases his theory on currently accepted concepts of molecular biology and high-energy physics. In molecular biology, the capacity of intracellular molecules to alter their spatial structure is recognized. Biomolecules are capable of making the transition from a liquid to an ordinary crystalline state. Dubrov defines this change as molecular conformational change. Like present-day high-energy physicists, he believes that as a result of this change, the molecules are brought so close to each other that tremendous forces of attraction or gravitation emerge. When this occurs, a constant conformational field having a quasi-gravitational nature is formed. In Dubrov's opinion, this means that a vector or a force field is formed at the subcellular level, which is capable of attracting or repelling naturally occurring gravitational forces, or of itself emitting minute gravitational waves. Dubrov feels that psychic subjects may, in some manner, have the ability to synchronize their subcellular, molecular, conformational changes and thus generate attractive or gravitational fields of sufficient strength to alter electromagnetic or natural gravitational forces acting on a target object. Dubrov, like some other Soviet and Western parapsychologists, thinks that changes in space-time continuum may be the basis for observed psychokinetic phenomena, i.e., time may be accelerated or decelerated by the psychic subject. So this, to me, I like this theory the most so far. And what they're really dancing around here is this idea of quantum mechanics and quantum entanglement, and this idea of the body and the communication that occurs in the body at the subcellular level, being in the quantum mechanical fields, right? Function with an understanding or definitions that fall within the realm of quantum mechanics. And when we look at quantum mechanics, that is the science that tries to understand gravity in a different way than just classical science, if you will. And this idea that there is a quantum field that puts everybody and everything in a redefined way, where time is no longer really relative. So I like this one the best, and I'm not going to digress too far on it. But when we look at how biology functions and how nanosensors work, they use quantum mechanical principles. And so from what I've read with, nanotechnology and looking at nanotransistors and quantum dots and all of these things that may or may not be used in the body, they function using quantum mechanical principles. And so they would then be able to measure quantum mechanics if they were theoretically put into the body. And so to me, that theory is the most interesting. Anyway, in 1973 and 1974, a Soviet psychic named Boris Yermolov participated in a series of experiments at Moscow University. Yermolov is reported to have the ability to levitate or suspend objects in midair by concentrating psychic energy at a focal point in space. In some of the tests, Imralav pressed an object between his hands and then slowly moved his hands apart until they were approximately 8 inches from the object, which remained suspended in the air. Soviet scientists claimed that all tests were conducted under the strictest controls and that no strings or other devices of any kind were used. Dubrov feels that Imralev's levitation powers can be used to prove that space-time and gravitational changes occur in the area between the psychic's hands and the object. He suggests that the transmission of electromagnetic energy of known velocity should be delayed when beamed through the levitation field. 2 female psychic subjects, Nina Kuligina and looks like Alla Vinogradova, have been studied extensively by Dr. Sergeyev and Adamenko. According to Sergeyev, Miss Kuligina can control the beat of a frog heart. Wow. So this lady can control the beat of frog heart preparations. She can imprint images on shielded photographic emulsions and move objects weighing 1 pound or more. In 1970, Dr. Sergeyev conducted experiments in which Miss Kuligina was asked to influence, if possible, a living frog heart preparation. Such preparations normally continue to beat for several hours after removal from the animal's body. In one experiment, the heart was placed in a glass jar 2.5 feet from Miss Kuligina. As she concentrated on controlling its beat, electrocardiogram showed that the rate of contraction increased or decreased at her command. 5 minutes after the experiment began, she stopped it beating entirely. When a second preparation was placed in a jar, its beat was stopped in 23 minutes. In other experiments, Miss Kuligina imprinted images on unexposed film sealed in black envelopes. During these experiments, Sergeyev measured the energy around the psychic's body and found it to be half that of a non-psychic individual. This led Sergeyev to believe that she absorbs or draws energy from around her and then discharges it on the target object. Ms. Kuligina experiences considerable stress while she's being tested. Her pulse increases, as does her rate of breathing. She develops pain in her upper spine and the back of her neck. At the onset of her activated state, she feels thirsty and has a taste of iron or copper in her mouth. During the activated state, she experiences occasional periods of dizziness and nausea. Her blood sugar levels rise, and within 1 hour following cessation of tests, a loss of weight, 1.5 to 2 pounds, occurs. She experiences less stress when alone and claims to respond best in an atmosphere of friendly, mutual trust and belief. Her psychokinetic ability is mood dependent, her mood and the mood of the observers, and she expends more energy in a hostile or skeptical atmosphere. Wow. The mechanical aspects of Miss Kuligina's psychokinetic effects are as follows. Size and shape are more important than the physical structure of the substance she's trying to influence. Weight and dimensions of objects she is trying to move are important. The weights vary from a few ounces to nearly 1 pound. She finds moving a vertical cylinder easier than moving a horizontal one. She causes no changes in the shape of soft objects during movement. The direction an object moves depends on her will and may be either toward or away from her. She can also cause rotational or vertical movements to occur. Kuligina's optimum field effects occur at approximately 1.5 feet. Her distance limit is approximately 3 feet, 4 inches. When the object to be influenced is 3 feet from the edge of a working surface. At these distances, she is said to be able to move one object out of many, depending upon where she centers her concentration. The electrical aspects of Kulagina's effects are as follows. An electrical field is generated in the vicinity of the object she is attempting to influence. However, there is no measurable field between Kulagina and the object, and no sparks are observed. She can exert no effect on an object situated in a vacuum. Electrostatic screening has no effect on her powers, which seems to be better with the object under a dielectric cover, but she is unsuccessful during storms or other atmospheric conditions when there is a greater than normal amount of electricity in the air. She cannot at any time exert an influence on an electroscope. She can cause luminescence of crystal lumiphores and produce changes in the spectrum of visible light absorbed by liquid crystals. That's kind of cool. Dr. Adamenko has found that Alla Vinogradova produces effects similar to those of Nina Kulagina, but undergoes far less physiological stress. In some of his experiments with her in Moscow, during which she moved a variety of objects about on a dielectric surface, a great deal of electrostatic energy was measured around the object, supposedly enough to light a small neon glow tube. The measurements detected field pulsations, which were synchronous with Vinogradova's respiration rate, heartbeat, and brain alpha rhythm pattern. However, the region between Vinogradova and the object contained no energy fields nor frequencies, and the electrostatic energy increased in intensity as the objects were approached. The results with Alla Vinogradova have led Adamenko to believe that there may be individuals who have the ability to build up an electrostatic field on the body surface at will and project it as required. The Czechs, like the Soviets, are attempting to identify the source or sources of biological energy, but their research is not centered on psychically gifted individuals. Instead, some leading Czech parapsychologists have developed the theory that most people possess psychic capabilities and that such capabilities may be best demonstrated as observable psychokinetic effects. Czech parapsychology research is currently heavily psychokinetically oriented, or telekinetically oriented, probably as a result of Robert Pavlita's development of psychotronic generators, which was described in the above section, part 2. The Czechs' belief that the use of these devices for biological energy collection and concentration may make it possible for nearly anyone to cause psychokinetic effects. Although the design and construction of the generators may be quite complex, they are simple to operate and require only minimal training in their operation. They have two other major advantages. They require no supervision of the subject by an investigator, and the observable physical effects, motion, attraction, etc., serve as positive, encouraging feedback for the subject. One of Pavlita's devices for demonstrating psychokinesis is shown in Figure 8. The usual way of charging the device with psychic energy is to touch the temple area of the head with the hand, then touch the device. The accumulated energy then causes the spoked wheel to revolve. Pavlita claims that with training, some individuals can learn to make the wheel turn by visual concentration alone. Czech physicist Julius Kremesky has experimented with very light foil or paper discs or cylinders enclosed in circular containers. The effect of biological energy on them is generally a slow but observable rotation. They have no directly practical applications, but Kremesky feels that they are ideal research tools since they are simple, inexpensive, and require no special training or psychic talent for their operation. A device similar to Kremesky's is shown in Figure 9. The cylinder is made to rotate by placing the hands above or alongside the device while concentrating one's gaze on the upper strip or crossbar. Kremesky recommends isolation of the system from the motion of air and the effect of heat radiation by enclosing it in glass, metal, or other containers with provision for inspection through a glass cover. Motions in such enclosed spaces are slow and hence not too spectacular, but are nevertheless convincing. The slow rate of motion or the occasional immobility cannot be explained by the walls being impenetrable to outside impulses, because the device is able to detect the nearing of a hand, even through a thick layer of lumber, metal, water, etc. The cause lies somewhere else. The reaction of rotational systems in free and enclosed space is highly variable and changes with the place and time. Kremesky believes that changes of meteorological or even cosmic nature may be the cause. Similar cases occur with physics experiments, where even the most carefully prepared electrostatic demonstration may not be successful if a change in weather raises the relative humidity or causes alterations in atmospheric ionization. Magnetic experiments are disrupted by the proximity of magnets, electrical wiring, and appliances, and also by the aurora borealis, sunspot activity, or other cosmic causes. The causes of disturbances in psychokinetic experiments have yet to be explained. Kremesky feels that no quantitative observations could be made in the privacy of homes, where diverse effects accumulate and overlap. Such effects are various radiations, changes in the conditions of illumination, meaning an intensity of diffused daylight, for example. These look like the figures that they mentioned, figures 8 and 9, and they are faded. So illumination and the presence and changing positions of objects and persons, perhaps even in the next room or the next apartment. So what they're saying is that these things need to be done in a lab because the energy is so delicate that there are a lot of controls that need to be put into effect. Rotational systems enclosed in cylindrical containers are the most suitable for experiments. Angular enclosures are unsuitable for this purpose, since the motions observed in them are too slow and unconvincing. The best devices consist of rods or tubes suspended horizontally by a monofilament thread, foils in the shape of narrow rectangles rotating about their minor axes, or circular planes rotating about their diameter. The angular velocities of the rotational systems are sometimes very noticeable, but more often they are comparable to the velocity of a watch's minute hand. However, such systems are able to exclude other physical causes that could influence rotational motion. Placement in a steel container can form a magnetic shield. A glass jar or cylinder can be packed in a grounded Faraday cage of woven wire, or the space between the walls of two containers, one placed in the other container, can be filled with water to shield against electrostatic energy. Despite such measures, the indicators react to changes in radiation from heat and light sources. They react especially sharply in direct sunlight, but they also detect changes in diffused daylight or the narrow beam of a flashlight, even from a considerable distance. Under stable conditions of heat and light, the indicators remain steady in some equilibrium position. A convincing example of this is the fact that when an indicator is permanently located, it settles in the same equilibrium position every night and remains in it until morning. After sunrise, even on a cloudy day, it occupies a new position and maintains it until it is subjected to a further impulse, for example, to a sudden clearing of the sky, to the presence of a person, to a change in the position of nearby objects, etc. From such observation, Kremesky assumes that successful telekinetic experiments are very demanding in terms of their physical conditions. Such experiments cannot be performed in just any time or place. There are cases when the indicator's plane occasionally rotates without any intervention by the experimenter and without any perceptible cause. If such a case occurs under constant conditions of light and heat, and if its cause cannot be determined in the immediate environment, then Kremesky feels that the effect of distant sources of radiation, perhaps even of cosmic origin, may be the energetic force. The opposite of this seemingly spontaneous motion has also been observed. The rotational system will remain practically immobile. The indicator will not be affected much by either a gaze or the proximity of the hand, and a very slow displacement of only a few degrees is all that can be induced. Thus, a suitable time and place must be chosen for the experiment so that the conditions may be as favorable as possible. So that was a long paragraph about scientists trying to understand the subtle nuances of environmental factors that ultimately interfere with, assist with, conflict with measuring telekinesis or psychokinesis. And through those measurements, trying to understand things like changes in temperature, changes in humidity, changes in the amount of light, changes in the electrostatic charge in the atmosphere, cosmic radiation, all of these things. Also, those observations in and of themselves provide insights into environmental circumstances that we're all subjected to. So very interesting stuff. And the fact that they were using like thin pieces of paper and watching them rotate in confined spaces in order to try to measure these things, it's really remarkable. Really remarkable. This was back in the 60s, right? This document was published in what looks like 1975 from the Defense Intelligence Agency. And this is a report about Soviet and Czech parapsychological research, natural energy, biologic energy. Kremesky found that the indicators reacted not only to the nearness of a human body, but also to a slightly lesser extent to other animate and inanimate objects. They also reacted to the nearness of plants, vegetables, fruits, flowers, etc., and to subjects made of a variety of materials, metal, glass, etc., so long as the surface areas were sufficiently large. When the dimensions of the objects were small, their activity was increased by roughing their surface, thus essentially increasing the surface area. Porous or spiny objects such as sponges or sea urchins were especially suitable for experiments of this type. To ensure that the temperature of these objects were the same as that of the movable systems, they were placed near the indicators for a sufficient length of time to allow for temperature equilibration. Only then were experiments performed, and the positive results obtained completely eliminated heat radiation as a source of energy. Kremesky has found that although the hands and other parts of the body are effective at inducing rotational motion, a fixed gaze produces motion of a greater magnitude, probably because it condenses the biological energy into a fairly concentrated beam, whereas impulses from the body's surface are scattered. The visual rays were shown to exert an effect even when reflected or when focused through binoculars. In Kremesky's experiments with inanimate objects and plants, man's role was of a very brief duration and consisted only of placing the objects or plants near the device. In future experiments, Kremesky plans to position such objects by purely mechanical means. He feels that if positive results are still obtained, he will have demonstrated that interactions between object and objects and humans and objects differ. At the present stage of his research, he supports his hypothesis as follows. The indicator distinguishes the effect of objects from the effect of man in the following manner. After an object has been placed near the indicator, the plane rotates from its original equilibrium position to a new equilibrium position and remains in it or gradually returns to the original position. When man affects the indicator, the final position of the indicator's plane depends on man's will, unless fatigue, that is, an accompanying phenomenon of psychic exertion, sets in. Kremesky believes that he is observing an energy field which is quite similar to magnetism, but a magnetism with some finer structure and some very unstable fluid field. The poles of this magnetic field may be formed by very easily movable plasma particles that represent elementary magnets, which, under the influence of external factors, are never in a completely chaotic state, but rather in a very unsteady state of partial ordering. Probably the occasional observed fine oscillations of the indicator's plane at the beginning of a rotation are actually the collective effect of the process of aligning the particles. Kremesky has yet to explain why, under seemingly identical conditions, in response to apparently identical stimuli, the rotational indicators of his device are on one occasion attracted and on another occasion repelled. Such erratic responses seem to indicate a double magnetic layer in which the poles are located side by side. This is not feasible if the poles are similar to electric charges. The indicators react as if there are positive and negative and neutral loci alternatingly distributed in a relatively small plane. The materials from which the devices are built are such that they should not react to the inductive effect of the Earth's magnetic field. So what they're getting at here is they're speculating that this idea of nearby objects, animate or inanimate, plants, animals, or even humans, are generating fields that at the invisible level, right, the sub-microscopic level, subcellular level, we could say, just to provide some perspective, is that you're having particles, and I'm using that term generically, you're having particles align where they're random in nature until some influence is exerted upon them. And then they are loosely organized. They're loosely put into some structure, and that is ultimately creating these sensor arrays that they're measuring. They're causing these things to change their equilibrium. And this has to do ultimately with trying to understand the subtle, invisible energies that are around us and what one object does to another. When we think about the idea of gravity, it has to do with the mass of something and how close something is to something else. So there's two things that classical science, if you will, defines gravity as, or the effect of gravity is relative to two things: what the density or the mass of something is, and how far away that mass is from another mass. For some reason, that creates an attraction, gravity, what we understand as gravity. It's just one example. And they're trying to understand these other elusive forces that are causing these things to rotate, for example, and these cheap sensors that they've made. So Kremesky has advanced the theory that the hypothetical poles in all objects on the Earth's surface are induced by light or by radiation in general. This quasi-magnetic field, then, could be a resultant phenomenon induced by interaction of plasma and radiation without having to assume an analogy to the Earth's magnetic field. He also accepts the hypothesis that in man's brain, the processes of thinking are accompanied by the motion of plasma particles, and that this motion is the source of excitation, or more aptly, the modulator in this hypothetical field of very fine structure, and able to transmit much more suitable impulses than the well-known electromagnetic fields. But even in this case, he does not disregard the role of the electromagnetic field. Certain phenomena, the reflection of visual rays by polished surfaces, refraction, the effect of light on the polarity of objects, etc., indicate that a common denominator for psychokinesis, and for the electromagnetic field may eventually be found. All of the Soviet and Czech research on psychokinesis is significant, especially that associated with the spectacular Soviet physics Kulygina, Vinogradova, and Ermoliev. Kulygina's highly publicized ability to affect living tissues may be applied against human targets. In like manner, Vinogradova's power to move objects and Ermoliev's levitational ability could possibly be used to activate or deactivate power supplies or to steal military documents or hardware. Robert Pavlita's generators and Julius Kremesky's psychokinetic indicators could be, and possibly are now, used to train large numbers of lesser-known Soviet and Czech citizens to develop, enhance, and control their latent psychic abilities. Such a cadre of trained but anonymous individuals could be used for any number of covert activities. Less spectacular but more significant is the fact that Soviet and Czech scientists are pursuing an interrelated, unified approach to determining the energy sources and interactions underlying psychokinesis, and appear to be far ahead of their Western counterparts in reaching this goal. It would be but a short step from understanding to application, and there is little doubt that many applications can be directed towards man for whatever purposes, be it good or bad. Figure 9, a psychotronic rotor. So this is a jar within a glass jar kind of a thing. And they were talking about putting something like a thin piece of paper in there and having it rotate around. Pretty basic diagram. Part 4. Out of the body phenomena. Section 1, remote viewing. Remote viewing refers to the ability of some individuals to project themselves mentally to remote or inaccessible locations and observe and report on details of terrain, structures, or other salient features. This ability is also referred to as astral or mental projection. It differs from telepathy in that the percipient does not piece together information bits to form an image, but rather has a vivid sense of leaving his body and personally observing the target area in toto. Remote viewing has been investigated in the U.S. at Stanford Research Institute, Menlo Park, California. Psychically gifted subjects were tested for the ability by presenting them with map coordinates randomly selected on a double-blind basis. The subjects were required to respond immediately with a description of the target area and were tested both with and without feedback as to their accuracy. According to the SRI report, Stanford Research, there were at least some categories of information in which the results exceeded any possible statistical bounds of coincidental correlation and precluded acquisition of data by known means. And it looks like there are some redactions here. SRI, Stanford Research Institute, reports of remote viewing research have not been publicized, but other SRI research on the psychic abilities of an Israeli and British subject have been widely cited in the U.S. news media. Geller the Israeli, has been quoted many times on his avowed ability to transport himself mentally to any place of his choosing. Soviet parapsychologists are aware of Geller's claims. He has, in fact, been invited to the Soviet Union for tests, and continuing U.S. interest in this phenomenon, nevertheless, have reported very little similar research of their own, and it looks like there are more redactions. In 1970, Ostrander and Schrödinger reported that Soviets were studying out-of-the-body phenomena in yogis. No detail of the research was given. In 1972, the U.S. newspaper National Enquirer reported that the Soviets had accomplished astral projection in the laboratory and cited the opinion of a U.S. researcher that the technique would be in use for espionage before the end of the 1970s. Once again, no details of the Soviet work were furnished. With the exception of these two reports, no other information was available on Soviet out-of-the-body research, and no reports indicative of any interest have become available since 1972. The Soviets' apparent lack of interest in out-of-the-body phenomena has led some U.S. scientists to the conclusion that they must be interested in it and investigating it. However, there is insufficient information at present to support the conclusion that such phenomena represent a specific area of classified Soviet research. Section 2, the apport technique. The apport technique is a form of astral projection in which the psychic subject transports his energy body to a remote site, dematerializes an object, then transports it back and materializes it. Whoa. In past reports, there has been some very general speculation on espionage applications of the technique, but to date, no definitive reports, U.S. or foreign, have verified the claims of psychics reputed to have the ability. There have been no Soviet or European communist country reports concerning research on apport techniques. And if such research is being conducted, it is a well-kept secret. Lack of information on Soviet interest in this technique represents a major intelligence gap. Part 5, conclusions. Soviet and Czechoslovakian researchers have accepted the reality of paranormal events and are primarily concerned with the formulation of a unified theory that describe the basic energy transformations involved. The Soviet emphasis on electrostatic and electromagnetic components of the energy may play an important role in the final determination of the nature of physical phenomena. This emphasis on energetics or interaction effects has led to the concept that man must be investigated as a complete, integrated unit. Soviet and Czech psychotronic research will eventually be applied to human problems. As this occurs, the question will arise whether this knowledge and the equipment developed will be used for the enhancement of human freedom and social development, or for the regimentation and enslavement. Psychotronics could conceivably play a role in contributing to the survival of the human species by emphasizing the interconnections between all living beings. It should help to reduce human aggressive tendencies. By the same token, it could also be applied to increase such aggressive tendencies, and it has powerful potential for use as an effective weapon against groups of men and key leaders. Those are pretty insightful comments, folks. This idea of using energy to influence the biology or the bioenergetic systems of another human to the extent that they can be used to influence or destroy groups of people and or target leaders, like leaders of countries or religious leaders The Czechs claim that a direct transfer of biological energy from healthy to diseased or injured muscle is not only possible, but proven. The Soviets do not restrict the possibility of such energy transfer to any one physiological system, but state that biological energy transfer can be utilized to relieve human functional disorders of the nervous system and internal organs and the mind. In all cases, such medical applications of biological energy transfer are officially described as having beneficial results, but this may not necessarily be true. By analogy, conventional medical techniques can be beneficial, but when misapplied, can also cause serious damage or even death. By the same token, there can also be psychic malpractice, although the Soviets and Czechs are not likely to publicize this fact. Both Czech and US researchers have described Robert Pavlita's work with psychotronic generators as possibly the most important contemporary development in the field of parapsychology, and as a major contribution to the deeper understanding, mastery, and utilization of biological energy for human advantage. Just as in the example of direct transfer of biological energy for medical purposes, the use of such devices is not necessarily intended to be beneficial. If Pavlita's device can kill insects at present, their potential in the future after refinement and enlargement may well be for killing men. If bioenergy can be reliably controlled and focused by such devices, death could be caused by disruption of fundamental brain rhythms, heart control, or biological clock mechanisms. It should also be pointed out that some of Pavlita's experiments seem to contradict Soviet results obtained with humans. As an example, the effect of his devices on suspended magnets is lessened if the magnets are electrostatically shielded, whereas such shielding has no effect in Soviet experiments with Nina Kulagina and Alla Vinogradova. It would appear that although the Czechs and Soviets are examining the same phenomena, passage of biological energy through Pavlita's devices alters it in some manner. This raises the question of how well these machines can be controlled, and whether the alteration they induce on bioenergy is beneficial or detrimental. Soviet research with Kulagina and Vinogradova indicates that the energy interchanges or transfer mechanisms may be possible between gifted psychics and inanimate objects. There is evidence that Soviet research with these women also involves attempts to influence animate biological systems. In 1972, Lamoth reported that Kulagina had the capability for stopping and starting the beat of an excised, living frog heart. If true, it supports the contention that Czech and Soviet claims for beneficial applications of biological energy transfer are reversible. If a frog heart can be started and stopped, the same effects might be imposed on humans. Such dramatic effects illustrate some of the dangerous potential of controlled biological energy transfer. And it looks like there's a considerable redaction and more redaction. In summary, it should be pointed out that Soviet parapsychologists continue to face problems similar to those of their Western counterparts, in that observed phenomena are unstable, and there is low probability of proving them in controlled tests under selected conditions. Soviet critics of the science have been quick to seize on these two characteristics in order to categorically reject many of the phenomena, and they have belittled some forms of such manifestations by contending that the conditions under which tests have been conducted have not been adequate to preclude fraud. In view of this situation, the Soviets will continue to investigate methodology, since they feel it absolutely necessary to quantify observed phenomena. Although they have not yet done so, the Soviets may very well be the first to identify the field forces involved and the means by which they are generated due to their concentration on the mechanisms and the energetics involved. Part 6, trends and forecasts. Criticism. All Soviet science is very much influenced by political ideology. Parapsychology, as a result of the fleeting phenomena it deals with, is perhaps more vulnerable to ideological attacks than other science. Soviet critics point out that parapsychology, as a pseudoscience, makes it enormously more difficult for the party to eliminate than religious prejudices and superstitions. They claim that parapsychology, if viewed from the standpoint of Lenin, represents a revival of the bourgeois subjective idealism. Soviet critics claim that subsensory, subthreshold perception takes place in the presence of a stimulus and an analyzer, and that such perception is subject to the very same physiological laws as is subjectively registered perception. They admit, however, that the study of these laws is still far from the stage at which it will be possible to explain scientifically a person's subconscious psychological activity. Concentration on energetics. Faced with such criticisms, Soviet and Czech scientists engaged in parapsychology research have more and more stressed the biological energy concept and are continuing to develop a theoretical basis which will provide an integrated approach to paranormal phenomena. In order to bring their science more nearly in line with accepted theories of contemporary physics, they have postulated a fifth state of matter consisting of free charged particles, arranged in an organized patterns, forming a uniform energy network. They are continuing to emphasize the electrostatic and electromagnetic components of such energy and argue that the eventual definition of this energy will allow them to ultimately integrate psychical phenomena into contemporary theoretical constructs of the universe. Official attitude. There are no indications of any organized or officially sanctioned attacks on Soviet Czech psychotronic research, but such criticisms have been noted, have appeared in state-sanctioned publications. Continued monitoring of the Soviet and Czech press will be required in order to determine whether or not the official attitude towards the science shifts. Forecasts. In the next 15 years, the Soviets and Czechs will continue to emphasize parapsychological research. Such research will, of necessity, involve further development of appropriate instrumentation for the detection and identification of the biological energy internal to the human body and its interactions with living or inanimate objects at a distance. The cyborg aspects, the coupling of human inductors with physical psychotronic devices, will continue to be emphasized. During this time frame, research will progress from instrumentation development to computer-assisted mathematical modeling of biological energy interactions. In order to establish a basis for such modeling, experimental techniques which can be controlled and replicated will be developed. This, in turn, will lead to the eventual improvement of research on paranormal phenomena, since they will be made increasingly more producible and predictable. And there is a redaction. The Soviets are known to be involved in development of interferential measurement and complex systems modeling techniques. The IMCSM is specially adapted for application to the examination and study of many objects, especially those with many interacting parts, even when the behavior of the objects are partially or mostly determined by features of which the researcher is unaware or which he cannot observe. Soviet parapsychology research would probably be an ideal subject for the application of the IMCSM technique. If the IMCSM technique is applied, the likelihood of a Soviet breakthrough in parapsychology is greatly increased. The Soviets are leaders in the development of this technique and will probably apply it to parapsychology research. And another redaction. Part 7, gaps. Information is needed on the effects of Nina Kulagina, Alla Vinogradova, and other Soviet psychics exert on magnetic tapes. More information is needed on Robert Pavlita's psychotronic generators. Pavlita was quoted as having stated that he intended to obtain foreign patents on his devices in 1974, after which he would publicly divulge the details of their construction and operation. Information is needed on such patent applications and on Pavlita's explanation of their construction and operation. More information is needed on the circuitry and response to characteristics of current or proposed Soviet or Czech biological energy detection instruments. Such information is needed on instruments utilized for measurements at the cellular level and at the total body level. Information is needed on the status of Soviet cellular radiation research. Present information indicates that they have identified ultraviolet radiation as one electromagnetic carrier or transfer mechanism from cell to cell. Interesting. More information on this research is needed in order to determine whether it is fortuitous in regard to Soviet parapsychology research or is an integral part of it. Information is needed on the extent of Soviet mass screening for identifying psychic citizens. Mass screening to identify psychic citizens. Doesn't that sound fun? Does the Soviet military have screening programs? And if so, which branches of service are involved? If such screening programs exist, are they conducted by psychological testing or by direct observation of abilities to influence simple instruments such as those developed by the Czechs? There are indications that the official attitude concerning parapsychology is changing in the Soviet Union and Czechoslovakia. Information is needed concerning the basis for the apparent changes in official attitude. Is there any evidence of clandestine use by the Soviets? Apparently, electromagnetic or electrostatic devices against personnel, equipment, or radio and television stations. Is there any evidence or connection between Soviet science of opinionology and psychotronic research? Is there any evidence of the application of the interferential measurement and complex system modeling techniques to Soviet or Czech parapsychology research? So, those are questions asked by the United States intelligence community. And this was published in 1975. So here's the appendix. We're just going to browse this real quick. We have 15 minutes left. So what's of interest to me is not necessarily the people, but more or less the institutes, which is what would kind of define or outline, give you some idea of where large amounts of money and energy and personnel were assigned. You have Moscow Institute of Radiophysics. You have a Brain Institute at the University of Leningrad. You have Earth Physics, Institute of Earth Physics, USSR Academy of Sciences. Another location of the same Brain Institute, University of Leningrad. Oh no, this is just a different person at that university. You've got University, Kaskow University, University of Novosibirsk, Institute of Higher Nervous Activity and Neurophysiology. Interesting. USSR Academy of Sciences. Soviet Academy of Pedagogical Sciences. Interesting. Institute of Technical Parapsychology, Moscow. Looks like Scientific and Technical Society of Radio Technology and Electrical Communications, Moscow. Physiology of Labor Laboratory at the University of Leningrad. Physiological Institute. Institute of Forensic Psychological Expertise. Moscow Institute of Aviation. And Public Health Department, Neurology Department at the Public Health Department. This is Prague, Czechoslovakia stuff. So they're making a distinguishing or a delineation between Soviet and Czech here with their affiliates. Psychotronic Research Section, Czechoslovakia. And we're down at the citations. All right, we have about 12 minutes left. So, let's see where we go from here. Well, I'll show you. Let's look at this. I found this the other day. And if you remember the brain, right, or the nervous system or neurons, they function using ion channels. And those ion channels ultimately determine whether a brain or a neuron is going to fire in the brain or in the nervous system. And so I found this. This is a patent from the Environmental Protection Agency. Method and apparatus for altering ionic interactions with magnetic fields. Magnetic fields. And this is kind of important, right? Because magnetic fields are everywhere. A method is presented for altering or affecting ionic interactions in systems containing an unhydrated ion, including cells and organisms, using magnetic fields. The method involves controlling the orientation and varying the intensity and fluctuation frequency of paired, static, and sinusoidally varying magnetic fields in such a way as to create certain magnetic interactions between ions and the molecules with which they are associated. Using the ion parametric resonance model developed in the present invention, the magnetic fields can be adjusted to control precisely the desired orientation, intensity, and fluctuation frequency of magnetic fields. Creepy stuff, folks. Background of this invention. We'll read this until we run out of time. We will revisit this patent. This patent's a gold mine, quite frankly. Tissue and cell development have been studied extensively to determine the mechanisms by which maturation, maintenance, and repair occur in living organisms. So the study of cells and tissues in life, plant, animal, human, right, have been studied to understand cells as they mature, the maintenance and upkeep of cells, and the repair of cells or tissue in living organisms. Generally, development of a cell or tissue can be considered as a transformation from one state or stage to another, relatively permanent state or condition. Development encompasses a wide variety of patterns, all of which are characterized by a progressive and systematic transformation of cells or tissues. So what they're talking about is a life cycle of an organism that can be quantified or defined as the entire organism, as a subset of the organism, like an organ, or down to a single cell. In many instances, it's desirable to control or alter the development of cells. In many instances, it's desirable to control or alter the development of cells and tissues in vivo, meaning in the body, in the host, in the living organism. It is hoped that means can be provided to restore or maintain the natural order of an organism after a debilitating injury, disease, or other abnormality. That is a real fancy, creative way of saying it is desirable to be able to fix something that's broken in a living entity, in a living biological body. As will be appreciated by those skilled in the art, those who know what they're doing with this kind of technology, tissue and organic development involve complex processes of cellular growth, differentiation, and interaction mediated by complex biochemical reactions. So as cells grow or repair, regenerate, whatever, biochemical reactions are occurring. At the genetic level, development is regulated by genomic expression. At the cellular level, the role of membrane interaction with the complex biochemical milieu of higher organisms is instrumental in the developmental process. Moreover, remodeling of tissues, and a tissue remodel, or organs, an organ remodel, is often an essential step in the natural development of higher organisms. A role for biologically active ions in cellular activity is well established. Techniques are disclosed for controlling the movement of a pre-selected ionic species across the membrane of a living cell. So sodium ion, potassium ion, chloride, calcium ions that literally create the electric charges in the body. They're talking about these things passing back and forth through the membrane of a living cell. The inventors disclosed that by exposing a region of living tissue of a subject, such as a human or an animal, to an oscillating magnetic field, a varying, changing magnetic field of a predetermined flux density, so the power, right? The movement of the magnetic field, that's the flux density, and the frequency, the number of times it oscillates, right? The rate of tissue growth can be controlled. For stimulating bone growth, right, a fluctuating magnetic field is tuned to a specific cyclotron resonance frequency of a pre-selected ion, such as calcium or magnesium. Notice they have the positive charge here. So what they're saying is that they can tune a magnetic field oscillation, the variation of the magnetic field, and the strength of the magnetic field can also be tuned and varied. And they do these things in such a way as to get the calcium ions in your body, or the magnesium ions in your body, to resonate, so that they can steer them and turn them on or off and move them back and forth through cells to do things like regrow tissue and bone. Additionally, in this Leiboff patent that they're citing here, discloses the use of cyclotron resonance tuning to control the growth of non-osseous, non-cartilaginous, connective solid tissue. Now we're talking about regrowing connective tissue. In US patent number blah, 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 Leiboff discloses a method and apparatus based on cyclotron resonance tuning, which allow the growth rate of cartilaginous tissue to be regulated. So to regulate the cartilage growth in your body with magnetic fields. Things should make you go, An even more important use of cyclotron resonance tuning, which is of particular significance in the treatment of elderly patients, is disclosed in this patent, which deals with a method and apparatus for treating and preventing osteoporosis, both locally and systemically. Additional patents granted to Leboff and his coworkers in the field of ion cyclotron resonance, which is what they can use to manipulate your brain. Because that's how your brain and your nervous system works. It works with ion channels, opening and closing, regulating the membrane potentials that allow your neurons to fire or be suppressed. And they can partially open and close these things and make it so that they can suppress and prevent certain neural circuits from firing. They can overexcite them and burn out neural circuits and melt your freaking brain. But hey, we're looking at elderly therapy for things like osteoporosis and, using radiotherapy to regrow bones and cartilage and tissues and shit. All of the above cited patents are hereby incorporated in this patent held by the EPA. These patents address various applications of the concept of magnetic field-induced changes in the ion transport in biological systems. The primary requirement for these applications is for a time-varying AC, preferably sinusoidal, magnetic field and a static magnetic field oriented in parallel to the AC field, right? So you have a static field and you have an alternating magnetic field that are running in parallel to each other that then allow for ion transport on demand, on command, into and through various parts of your cells and your tissues. To help or hurt? That is the question. To help or hurt? And we, folks, are out of time. Just know that this patent, should you choose to read it, will blow your mind. US 5919679. And we will review this patent at a later time.